Hey there, welcome back to If I Knew You Better. My name is Brendan Davis. I'm the host, and pardon the raspy voice. I'm not sick, in case anyone starts to get concerned you're going to catch something from the microphone. I don't think that's possible, but I am basically losing my voice, courtesy of all the conversations I've been having, and some of them have been for business calls, meetings these days, many of them for that, but among other things, like a lot of us during this time, I've been catching up with people who I haven't talked to in a long time, which has been great. So more talking than normal. But part of that, I'm glad to say, is because I've been able to really engage and have some great conversations for interviews for this podcast, as well as some of my other audiovisual efforts. But this week, I'm really happy to bring you this interview with Ms. Jacqueline Frost. Jackie is many things. She's a filmmaker and cinematographer as her primary weapon. She is a longtime educator, and she is the author of what is becoming a classic book called Cinematography for Directors. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The subhead is A Guide for Creative Collaboration. And this is really for the film people, this episode, but there's a lot in here that's pretty interesting, I believe, for a general audience. So I think that it would, if you're tuned in this far, give it a little while. We're not just talking about cameras and technical things, in case that's not your trip at all. We get into approaches to collaboration. We discuss briefly sort of, the reflections that she's had dealing with this pandemic situation and teaching remotely, because as I mentioned, Jackie's a professor, and discuss what it's going to be like to kind of get back to work again a little bit. So this was a very interesting conversation for me. We recorded a couple of weeks ago, and my voice sounds normal in the episode, so you won't have to hear my scratchy throat for too much longer. Don't forget to reach out to me via my website, crazyinagoodway.com. There is a contact form linked in the menu if you want to reach out and get in touch for some reason. You can also find me on the various social medias. Just search Brendan Davis. There are a handful of Brendan Davises in the world now, but if you search Brendan Davis and podcasts, you will find me all kinds of places. For now, please enjoy this very delightful conversation in my memory with Miss Jacqueline Frost. Jacqueline Frost, welcome to the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk with you. I have become a very big fan of the book that you're so well known for, but we're going to get to that in a few moments. If I could ask you to please start with giving us a little bit of a background on yourself, sort of where did you come from, and kind of the, sort of the short version of your life and greatest hits, and then we'll get into all the interesting details.
Okay. Well, in a nutshell, basically I started out as a fine arts major as an undergraduate. So I was studying a lot of art history, drawing, painting, all of that. And then I fell in love with photography. And I was at the University of Florida in Gainesville, and I was studying with Jerry Uelsman, who was an experimental still photographer, did really interesting stuff with multiple printing and images like that. So I was very inspired by fine art photography. Then my senior year there, I took a film history class. Mm-hmm. And that was it. I fell in love with film history. I had an aptitude for it that I had no idea was living there in my brain. Loved it. So that kind of catapulted me to want to learn more about filmmaking. I grew up with a mother who always had a Super 8 movie camera with us on vacations. So sometimes I would grab that Super 8 movie camera and shoot stuff too. So cinematography was something that kind of was a little bit of photography, fine arts, and everything all mushed together. So the more I studied film in various graduate programs and began teaching, the more I realized that my entire background led me to write that book.
And that book that we're referring to is Cinematography for Directors, which, of course, is published by Michael Wiese Productions, our good friends. And the subhead of this is A Guide for Creative Collaboration, which really nicely puts this in context. And the title, of course, and the subhead give it away. But part of what really impressed me with the book was, frankly, how comprehensive it is. And people listening to the show kind of know my background, but for you, I mean, I went to film school at Georgia State University 30 odd years ago, and I've been working ever since, from the technical and then to the above the line side, and realizing how just what a step-by-step guide this is. And it really leads a budding director, up-and-coming filmmaker, or a very experienced one through really everything I think you need to know about the cinematographer's role and the high level and some details of all the different aspects of the craft that a director needs to consider to best tell their story. So it's the culmination of your life's work and interest to do this, and this is the second edition. When was the first edition published? I forget, and I could look, but it's easier to ask you probably.
I believe it came out in 2009.
Okay.
The first edition.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it had a good 10-year run on its own, but the industry changed so much in that time period. I mean, the book came out, I think, in August, and then next thing you know, Alexa came out.
And ironically, this is only audio. I'm wearing my Alexa 65 hat as we talk. So
that's changed the whole digital, the way people were shooting films. That just started the digital revolution. So fortunately, people were going back and forth, between film, digital for another maybe 5 years before everything started closing and changing. But when I proposed the rewrite, it was a couple years before I actually got to it. Mm-hmm. And then when I got to it, I realized I had to tear it apart. Yeah. I mean, I gutted it. I didn't just rewrite a few things.
It seems like a pretty new book to me. I didn't read the first edition. I didn't catch it. I would have loved to, but yes, other than some of the interviews that are obviously legacy with some people who have moved on or whatnot, because you have so many interviews, which is part of what makes it special, is all this, war stories are one thing, but it's like actually actionable information from these war stories of just legendary cinematographers, many of whom are ASC members, and of course directors you're working with as well. And then I think there's a few producer comments in there, if I'm not mistaken. And it's so other than a few of the interviews of people who are perhaps deceased or retired, it seems like you wrote it last week. Essentially, it seems very, very, very current. Well, and how did you? I'm going to jump around a little bit. How did you develop your obviously very close relationship, and please talk about it, with the ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers? How did you? They're the leading trade organization really worldwide for cinematographers, in case somebody's not in our industry. How did you sort of develop that relationship?
Oh, it's interesting because I started teaching cinematography at Cal State Fullerton, and then I discovered that you could bring students to the clubhouse, the ASC clubhouse, on a field trip. So I inquired about that. I would go to their open house events, and I would encourage my students to do the same. So years upon years of going to the ASC clubhouse, going to the events, then I started interviewing cinematographers little by little. I would talk to them after events at Cinegear, for example. And that's how I met Crudo and Daniel Pearl. And I went to a master's workshop, lighting workshop with Rodrigo Prieto.
Wow.
And I actually, cool. Yeah, it was. And so I approached him in person. Will you talk to me? And I said, sure. So, I mean, it was kind of the repetition of it all.
Yeah.
So now that I go, I feel like I'm part of their family in a way, like, a distant relative coming to visit. So it's become a very comfortable relationship.
Yeah.
And so I continue to interview cinematographers, and I'm in fact working, this is on the side, but on an interview book with cinematographers. So I have very recent information, some of which I put into Cinematography for Directors, second edition.
Yeah, some of that, I can tell that there's definitely a lot of, especially when you're talking about digital cinematography and cinema, a lot of conversation, very forward looking. How do we do this? And part of what I really appreciate about this is there are aspects of this that, I mean, even a casual person, I mean, I don't know what everyone's into who listens to the show, of course, but I do know anecdotally, at least, there's a fairly heavy percentage of sort of entertainment folk. So the average listener to this show has a little bit more knowledge than just a layman, but I also have people who are just curious to learn these things. Yeah. So part of the process. I mean, everyone sort of, we all know what the result of the work looks like. We all have television and have seen films and such, but most people don't understand just how incredibly technical it is. It's an art and a science. And especially with the digital tools, the post-production process, the finishing process, the delivery, I mean, there's so many places where things can go wrong, and there always have been. The photochemical process was, you never knew, there was a lot more that could go wrong. You didn't know what you would get necessarily. What are some of the things that you're excited about that are sort of current developments and events? And then what are you sort of looking ahead, in terms of the tech of this? What are some of the things sort of on the horizon that excite you, or what do you hope is kind of, what do you think the next steps might be? Because we already have just insane, we have the Alexa 65 is remarkable. I mean, probably the best camera on the planet, for motion pictures, definitely one of. But where does it go from here?
Well, being someone who's, I started teaching about 30 years ago, right? So with little Bolexes and, black and white reversal film, and then moving on to color and all of that. So it was very difficult for students that were trying to learn the craft of cinematography sometimes to just get a decent image.
Sure.
Now that's not an issue. You can get a decent image very easily.
Yeah, you can open up your iPhone and shoot in 4K with kind of a no-brainer.
So that changes a whole lot of the steps you had to go through to get the image. Okay, so now you can get an image easily. So the challenge becomes, what are you going to do with that image? How are you going to tell a story with that image? Putting it all together. So with digital image capture being so clean, so crisp, independent filmmakers can put together a project and screen it for somebody that almost looks finished.
Yeah.
I mean, back in the day, you're showing double system, and it was horrendous.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the art used to be that you had to know how to grade on the appropriate curve. You had to know what a thing looked like from the negative to the uncorrected, the raw, through the process, and then at the end we're going to do like a 1 light or a 3 light, or a color correction for the non-technical people. But so you had to be able to look at it through an optical viewfinder, video playback even, and guess what's that going to look like by the time we've done all the things we were planning to do. But you don't see it like that for sometimes months, depending on the project and the process. So that part has changed. But
so that part being kind of left behind, and that's why I debated even putting in film finishing in the book. I debated it.
Really glad.
But I thought there might be some diehard out there that wants to give it a shot. So
really glad you did.
Flipped it and made the DI come first and then put the film finishing because, it still happens.
Sure. Tarantino exists,
Exactly.
There are a handful of people. Chris Nolan is kind of keeping it real to the end, I think.
Trying to keep it real, trying to keep that old school way of working. But the thing is, today and moving forward, I think obviously what people can do more of is special effects. Visual effects are just unreal with what you can do. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon.
Sure.
So there may be people, and they're doing it, and they've been doing it for decades, going back to old films and redoing them with new technology and bringing them to life in a way that's new and interesting. Mm-hmm. The whole Marvel thing is a genre in and of itself because of what they can do.
Right.
So I think cinema, because of digital, is going to keep going in that direction. I don't know if we need to go beyond 8K, but who knows? I mean, we may be in a virtual world in 20 years. Maybe we could reach out and I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of people, sprinkled. I tried to do a rough count, even just to have a number to throw out as a reference. But I mean, there are hundreds upon hundreds of interview snippets from all these people you talk to over the years. And I love that idea that you started just by showing up with students and kind of got to know people and got to be known, and and now you're the cousin who knocks unexpectedly, but they're glad to see you, and they open the door. So I can't even imagine how much this process has increased your own knowledge and appreciation for the art and the people doing it. What would be just for anyone, but maybe especially the non-technical person or the technical? I don't want to constrain you, but what are a handful of the things that maybe you thought about, that you had confirmed through this process, either back in 2009 or currently? Or, what are some things that you've heard that interested you, challenged you, confirmed or denied conventional wisdom? I mean, what are some of the things that sort of stick out to you? Some of the, and if you can't put the thought to the person right off the top of your head, that's fine. But like, just in general, what are some of the touchstones that really opened your eyes as you went through this process?
Well, I found that my background was not dissimilar to theirs. Many of the cinematographers I talked to, we were talking about the same artists and having an interest in, Edward Hopper, Rembrandt, we were, Caravaggio, Vermeer, the same photographers, Nan Golden, Ansel Adams, painters even like Winslow Homer or, Wyatt. I mean, there were so many things that were cool. I was like, oh, okay, we're on the same page with that. Oh, you like photography too? I like photography too. Seamus McGarvey, he was wonderful to talk to. He started off as a still photographer. Not everybody did, but some of them started off as still photographers like I did. So he just loved to go off with a camera and shoot things. I did too,
Yeah.
So basically what I found in talking to these cinematographers, everybody from Rodrigo to Seamus to Matty Lebetique, John Seal, who I never thought I'd get to talk to in a million years, loved his work, and he was wonderful, entertaining. I spent 2.5 hours with him. I was fortunate to speak with Harris Savides before he passed away.
Okay. Yeah.
Had a
Legend.
wonderful afternoon with him. Recently spoke with Ed Lockman. Had a great time with him at his loft,
Very
talking
cool.
about art, talking about cinematography, talking about films,
Yeah.
Basically where my mind thinks like theirs.
Right.
And I think that we had a lot of similar interests, not only fine arts and photography, but sometimes similar films as references.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that the films I was teaching film history were relevant to what we were talking about, because I teach them not from an academic semiological perspective, but from a cinematographer's point of view, really, a filmmaker perspective. You should see The Graduate because of this. You should see Rebel Without a Cause because of that, or Douglas Sirk. I'm mentoring an MFA program here at FDU, and one of the students wrote me an email today thanking me for making him watch All That Heaven Allows, directed by Douglas Sirk, because of Russell Meddy's cinematography. And we were talking about color and color theory with that. So, I mean, that kind of thing, Probably the most intimidating interview I had with a cinematographer, because most of them I felt really, really comfortable, was Roger Deakins.
Okay. And was that because he's such a such a lion legend in the industry? I mean, you just mentioned a few of the legends, so you're used to dealing with some pretty, like Mount Rushmore of our craft, of that craft kind of people. But what was it about Mr. Deakins that?
I think, the fact that his wife basically told me I had 1 hour.
Okay, she was in charge,
and I was like, okay. Nobody else gave me a time limit, And most of these interviews, I have to say, were done in their homes. They weren't Skype or, they were in person.
That's how I do it normally when unless it's in across the country or world situation. Right. That's how pandemic. That's typically how I do it for all the obvious reasons. So
I'm in their homes, most of the time. Some I'm in a cafe or I'm in their homes or whatever. And with Roger, I just felt like the first question I asked him, and this is from the first book, right?
Right.
I said something like, what is your thoughts of working collaboratively with the cinematographer? How do you like to work? It was like a 3-question question, and he just laughed. That was the first thing he did, was laugh. I was like, oh man.
Okay.
But then I had him, I turned it, and he was engaged for the whole time, so that his wife came in and basically told me to leave, but he was totally ready to go. He was talking, we were having a great conversation, and it was very, very special. With John Seal, I think I talked to him for 2 or 2.5 hours. It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was sort of like he finally said, oh, I'm late for my appointment. I've got to go.
That's the best, when you you have a plan, like we have a plan, and sometimes, you end up just going on and on and on and on and on and on, which can be, if it's good, then it's great.
Because as you have your little script, the questions you want to ask, and you ask them, then sometimes that just goes off in another direction.
Absolutely. Well, that's a little of what's happening here. I mean, I have a plan, but then we kind of improvise. We kind of surf through it a little bit.
Right.
Well, you mentioned in addition to your passion with cinematography and the moving image and the still image, my cinematographer as well, Naeem Sarafi. I mean, he shot a project on this for us last year, which is how I got the nice hat. And he started as a still photographer. He was shooting stills in Iranian cinema. He was the youngest set photographer, before he came here. And he's a top graduate of their masterclass program at the ASC, and they're really, really taking care of my guy. They're really the reception has been amazing, and it's been really, just having known him for so long, it's been really gratifying to see how that organization works with somebody who's really dedicated and really talented. But you mentioned, of course, also teaching film history, and because cinematography is not for your entire portfolio. You teach production and history as well as cinematography, but you mentioned that you're teaching history through the lens of the lens. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I mean, I teach it in historical context. I always mention the cinematographer, which was never mentioned to me when I was learning it, So I'm always like, Rebel Without a Cause, shot by someone, The Graduate, this was special cinematography because it was shot by an older man, but it was seen as fresh and new because of the way he shot it and the way it was put together. Citizen Kane, you're talking about that, but that was a collaboration completely between
Greg Toll.
Greg Toll added so much to that film.
Oh, absolutely.
What it is without him.
Pioneer. I used to teach because I taught filmmaking and production and would advise in the cinematography program at my old school and whatnot. And teaching Citizen Kane, it was always showing them all the things. It's like, yes, this is pre-World War II basically, but look at all these techniques that you take for granted, things that, the students would look at it. And of course, with your modern eyes, you think you're so slick and so unimpressed. And it's like, no. Pay attention to what's happening and then realize, this is the first time that was done. No one had done this, or no one had used this technique in this certain way. That like the famous super low angles, like looking up at people because of the the filmmaking aspect of the relationship of power. Sure. Well, they cut a hole in the stage and dropped the camera because the cameras are massive, and so they had to cut a 6-8 foot hole in the stage to get that up angle, for instance, and just all these things. And that the kids are taking for granted because they say, I could do that with my iPhone. Yeah, but this camera was this big, show them a picture of the camera back in the day. This camera was like a refrigerator.
The film was only 25 ASI. I mean, it had an ISO of 25.
Wow.
That's horrendous,
it had
right?
To be, how hot were those sets with arc lights? And,
to create that completely high contrast look.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
and he had to shoot an f-stop that, was at least 16 to give him that depth of field.
Yeah. Yeah. For non-technical people, this basically means blasting kind of an ungodly amount of light to be able to create this contrast and these ratios. Right. That's cinematographers, of course, are always looking at ratios of light. How bright is this part versus this darker part versus this other even darker part, and why, Mm-hmm. So that's really cool. In terms of production, are you talking the sort of the nuts and bolts? Like here's how you prep a package. I mean, I'm sure if you're talking production,
I teach production.
Yeah, you're teaching production. I mean, are you teaching sort of the whole process, or do you have a sort of focus within that?
I have. I mean, I've taught so many different ranges of filmmaking, and for so many years that it used to be, say back in film one, it was all about the process.
Yeah.
But now it's not about the process as much anymore. It's about the product and the aesthetics to create the product. So many years, I was sort of a mentor to graduate thesis projects. Mm-hmm. So I would work, we'd go through all three stages of production. Mm-hmm. I would basically get funding for the students through the Hollywood Foreign Press Association to make these films. I would get gear from Canon sometimes, or really good deals from Panavision for them to shoot so they could rent gear and have a whole professional experience. So I would bring them through all three stages, from development, getting to production, scheduling and everything, getting to production and post-production. So I covered the full range. Yeah. I'm really kind of an independent guerrilla filmmaker kind of person.
Okay.
I learned by doing it and having to do it. I also teach documentary production because I've been shooting a lot of documentaries. I've done experimental I've taught experimental film, which is
Yeah.
a blast, you
Sure.
know.
Sure.
Um, so my process, I could do it all pretty much. So with
Uh-huh.
cinematography, I found that I often have students that are pretty tech savvy. Maybe they may be
Hmm.
more on the DIT side than I
Yeah.
am, for sure. So what I give them is aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of I ask cinematographers what I should be teaching, and they
Mm-hmm.
often say the technical doesn't matter. We'll figure that out. Somebody
Right.
will figure that out. It's about the process. It's
Mm.
about understanding why you're doing what you're doing. It's about understanding the theme and how to make that work better through visuals. What lens will do it. So you have to know your tools, but you don't have to know everything at that moment about bit compression rate or bit depth and what
Right.
you just need to know the basics of what you're doing, and then somebody more technical can help you figure out the other stuff.
That's a great approach, I think, and it resonates with me. There's a line that I often remember from there was a classic business, like pop business book. What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School came out in the 80s. You may remember when that book was on the shelves. Mark
Uh,
McCormick, hotshot CEO, interesting guy. He had a piece of advice. One of his things, very simple, but it's one of these fortune cookies that I've tried to pass on when people are stuck in a labyrinth of complication, is like, you don't have to understand how every single detail of something works to use everything. There's someone who knows all those details.
yeah.
Find that person. Find one of those people. Let them do it. And I love that idea because you focus on the art of it. Focus on the
Yes.
aesthetics. Focus on the art, because yes, a digital image technician, a DIT, can dial in. Assuming that you've got all the right tools and competent people in all the places, you can dial in kind of any look you want. It's like, what do you want, and why do you
Yeah.
want it,
What do you
and
want?
what are you trying to
Why?
say? Why do you want that? And this is a conversation that I've had with so many young filmmakers, student filmmakers, new filmmakers, is focus on why you're doing the things that you're doing,
Absolutely.
not just
Mhm.
learn how to connect tab A to slot B and go, hey, look, I made a thing. Well, okay, great,
Yeah.
So, wait,
Yeah.
I appreciate this, having taught a fraction of your 30 years, but I've been scratching around here for a while. What are some of the things you mentioned you've been doing, like experimental, documentary? What are you primarily cinematographer? Are you also wearing other hats? Are you also directing or producing or writing within this context, or does it just kind of depend on the project? Are you
You
are
know,
you hired
but
gun? Or are you putting it all
I've
together?
been
Where do
a,
you? Hmm? Was that
I've been a hired gun.
nice?
I've been a hired shooter. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and cinematography has always been a love of mine, for sure. And
Mm,
I think that, interestingly enough, this is a kind of a diversion, but I applied after I'd already gone to graduate school. I applied to AFI because I was at San Francisco State. I wound up with a master's, and it wasn't a terminal degree. And I knew I wanted to teach, but I also like cinematography, and I needed the F between the M and the A.
yeah.
So I thought, oh, I'll throw in an application AFI. This is like in 1987, 88,
Okay.
right? So I get a letter back from them saying you are number one um, of the list of alternates. If somebody drops out, you're in.
Mm,
Of course, my luck or my karma or whatever you want to call it, nobody dropped
mm,
out, so I didn't go. And what
okay.
I realized after talking to so many cinematographers, that had I gone, I would have had a whole different career. I would have not been a teacher so much as being a working
Yeah.
cinematographer in the industry. And women, I find that are my age or
Mm-hmm.
older, they had a harder time than women are having today. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of them have found a comfortable place to work in television.
I see that
And
a lot. A lot of female cinematographers, a lot of female directors and DPs coming up, and a lot of people who are transitioning between the worlds a
yeah,
bit. So you think you've seen it change? Would you say it's sort of roughly parallel to society changing in general, or has there
I think
has there been a motivating event? The film industry kind of tends to use today's terminology. I mean, the industry goes through these periods of getting woke about a thing or this thing or that thing, and so when they realize, oh hey, wow, we have half the population is really underrepresented here. Maybe we should proactively help to try to recruit and encourage, for instance, girls or people from like a group that's underrepresented and doesn't apply. Have you what's that must have been What's that like? 'Cause I assume
Well,
that's
I've seen
gratifying
it.
to see that, but what's in the process? You've been in it. This is
I
this is this
what
is
I
lived
have,
history. It's not academic for you.
yeah, I'd be the one standing by the SR3 or whatever, and somebody would say, "Oh, are you the talent?"
Hmm.
And I'm like, "No, I'm the cinematographer," and they'd look at me like I had three heads. So that was back in,
It's like, you
say,
think
the
I'm
early
an
90s.
actor? I mean,
I'm
you
dressed
could
like
you could be.
next to the camera.
Right. You're wearing your camera gear.
Yeah,
You got your cap and your tool belt, and
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. You got your
I'm
light
holding a
meter. Yeah,
mic.
got your meter. Your
You know what I mean? It was
yeah.
it was ridiculous things, and it was a little. I wasn't as resilient maybe as Nancy Schreiber.
Mm.
Just kept going and kept
Mm-hmm,
pushing it.
mm-hmm.
But I found that now, and of course in teaching, I've been teaching undergraduate young men for many, many, many years,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and most of them are in my cinematography class. Only the past maybe 5, maybe 10, I'm getting more women coming into cinematography because the women would generally move closer. They would do producing or
Mm-hmm.
editing, you know. They wouldn't want to be the person with the camera. Now, of course, there was the whole thing back in the day. The cameras were bigger, the cameras were
Sure.
heavier. I used to lug around a CP16 in film
Mm-hmm.
school.
Yeah.
They were tanks.
Yeah. Exactly.
But now their cameras are not always that way. And even
Mm-hmm.
if they are, you don't have to carry them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if you're a cinematographer, you better not be. You're not carrying that camera. Your AC's better snap to it.
And then you're running around with the camera all day. And I've done that too.
Right. Right.
I feel like I think because I have done both things that
Yeah.
I was able to teach it more effectively. I don't teach from a book, I teach from experience and then, you know, learning more beyond that. So, what's happened today is that women are becoming, I think, inspired by the fact that more women are stepping behind the camera.
Mm-hmm.
You, Rachel Morrison with
Sure.
her historical win, but
Yeah.
she's amazing.
Yeah.
She's smart, she's talented, and she's not afraid to go for it. And I think that women are being less intimidated, and I think that's part of the times,
Mm-hmm.
and that younger men working as crews as directors are more accepting of working with a woman cinematographer in ways that they weren't before.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this for some reason the other day. Some related note put it in my head. I was asked for an interview where I was the guest for something, talking about my old days coming up in Atlanta because that's where I'm from originally, and working on I was a boom operator or a sound mixer, so very closely. If you're the boom operator, you know the AC and the camera operator as well as anybody because you're always checking your frame, checking what the move is, and
Yeah.
making sure you're just right out of frame so you can get the best sound, but that you're not. My mixer. My mixer, Whit Norris, who's kind of a big guy at this point, but the guy who's really trained me, he would say, he said, your job is to make the camera operator nervous but not angry. just a little, just you want to make sure you get as close as you can, but just don't get in the frame. Like, I got it.
You're in my frame. Ruin
Got
the shot.
it. Got it. No, I hated that moment, but I was thinking back on it, and Atlanta's interesting. This sounds like a sidebar, but it's actually on this point. Because coming up in sort of the late 80s to mid 90s, and lots of movies of the week, lots of independent features, and occasionally a studio feature that was set in that part of the country. But a lot of movies of the week. That was kind of the bread and butter for a lot of us back in the day. And there were always, they tended to be regarded as like, oh, she's such a badass, because it was unusual to see, for some reason, often even a petite, or maybe she was normal or height or tall, but like very thin, like almost always a girl or a woman who physically you wouldn't think is the person who's going to go in there and grab that beast, like you talked about, picking up the thing with the heavy sticks, with like the tripod for civilians, but like picking up that loaded beast of a film camera, like Pana 35, and like throwing it on their shoulder,
Yeah.
because that was her job. If she was the AC, that was her job, and you do the job, you learn how to do it. And there was a set dresser named Alice who I used to always marvel at, because there was a saying. It's like, oh, we got to move that big couch over there. Give me three guys or Alice. And Alice was about 90 pounds. but by God, she knew how to leverage things and make it happen. So I like what you say that, I mean, women know they're strong. Maybe they're not as physically strong as like, the dolly grip can bench press more than them, but there's strength. And it's nice to see people not be sort of so precious about that stuff.
Well, and it's interesting because I did a lot of indie shooting, but lots of times Super 16. So I'm carrying around an SR3, and I did a lot of handheld with it. I'm loading the van myself. I'm setting it up myself. I'm moving it around with the Sackler 7x7 myself. And as you get older, that's when you realize you can't do that so much anymore.
Yeah, that's a heavy. I couldn't pick that up very well myself right now. That makes my shoulder and lower back hurt thinking about that.
Just thinking about it.
But you used to, if you did documentaries and you're handheld, you've got that thing up on your shoulder in the air all day.
So now I've been shooting this documentary about an artist with the artist's niece for several years now. We shot in Cuba and we shot in Rome and this and that. So the first time we started shooting in New York, I had a big package and I needed a van and I had a gear and stuff. And I've slimmed that package down so that I've got a tripod that I sling still over my shoulder. Okay. It's a smaller Sackler, but it's still a Sackler.
Yeah.
And got my gear with my Pelican case in it, my carry-on. And I'm going to put it in the overheads, and sometimes I'm like, oh,
gotta get a little leverage.
Can I get a hand here?
Is that one of those things where you're like, I hope they don't weigh this? the dimensions fit, but I hope they don't put this on the scale to check me on this.
But my package has gotten smaller and smaller. Yeah. That I couldn't work that way in Super 16 that I can digitally with the Canon gear. So, and I'm still shooting, but it's still gear.
Sure.
But the thing that's beautiful about the digital camera now, because I've been picking up some shots for this with it's a Canon C100 Mark II, and it's it does the compression for you, and it's so small, but you get some lenses and stuff, and it's a beautiful little thing that I've been carrying around, So that's it's workable, and you can put it on location and stuff, and that's what I've been shooting through. This documentary's gone through 5 formats, but
Wow, yeah. I cut and helped produce one of those where it was over 5 years, and it had so many formats as well as like interview, like Skype footage and things like that. So it's interesting because that look. What do you think? What are your thoughts on how our tolerance for varying aesthetic has changed? Obviously, it's one thing where if you have to use, like on a feature film, sometimes or even a TV show, you may have some specialty shots that require a different camera than your primary camera. Maybe you have to do a thing with a snorkel lens or some kind of a, for whatever reason, or it's an action scene and it's like a high-end GoPro or something. But what do you think? This is more of your film history and aesthetics sort of hat question. I guess it relates to cinematography. What do you think about the tolerance of kind of the mixed aesthetic?
If you look, going through film, historically things were much more linear in a lot of ways, and you get used to the look of the film. And John Seal even says that it doesn't matter what it's shot with, the audience is going to get used to it within the first 5-10 minutes, and then just go with it. Yeah. So you look at something that's like super 35 millimeter film, and then you look at a film like Time Code that Mike Figgis did in 1999, I believe it was, or 2000.
Yeah. That was shot on those Sonys, right? That was a videotape. It's like a cartridge. It's like the film was like 88 minutes, and there were multiple cameras. If people haven't seen Time Code, I think it was it Beta, but it was basically a cartridge, and the length of the cartridge was, I guess, 88 minutes was the maximum you could get, and so every camera got a new cartridge. They pressed record, and then off they went, and everybody had an earpiece and walkie-talkies and somebody coordinating the moves. It was fascinating.
So what I'm saying is it's a way of embracing technology as it changes, right? So you're used to film and the whole film thing, and then, okay, we've got this tape camera, let's go with this and go with that. And now, audiences today, they expect it to look crystal clear on whatever format they're watching it. Mm-hmm. And, you see people watching it on their phones and watching something. And so it's got to be crisp, right? Yeah. But does it have to be 8K on a phone? I don't think so, Yeah. But, okay, you used to a higher and higher definition look. Mm-hmm. And if you look at animation, what kids are watching, it's not the kind of stuff we grew up watching,
Yeah,
Bambi and
it's
whatever.
incredibly
It's
clean.
so crisp. It's so amazing. And
Mm.
you've got these creatures talking. I mean, it's just so unbelievably sharp
Right.
that anything else looks really old and crusty to them.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, like the fur and hair like look realistic now, which is amazing. That uncanny valley thing has been crossed for the most part. You know.
so in terms of the technology today, it's just unbelievable where we have come to, and the way now students, I have, I've been teaching cinematography for a long enough time that now I've got students who are doing beautiful time lapse. They're doing
Mm.
beautiful drone shots. They're like, this stuff looks good. You're
Mm-hmm.
coming out
Mm-hmm.
good looking real. You're gonna get hired, and they do. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
it's not like when I was shooting film and then I had to go get dailies and I had to beg somebody to give me something, to give me the tape, let me see my footage. It was
Hmm.
like
Oh yeah, it used to
the
be.
thing.
It used to be such a young filmmakers now. I sort of as I've got a lot of gray in my beard, I kind of like to resist being the you kids on my lawn kind of perspective. But I don't hear this. I don't hear this that much in my life. But back when I was teaching, just a few years back, or when I consulted or done engagements on this, if anybody wants to complain, I'm like, you have no idea you have no idea, no idea at all. Like just to get your clips to cut a reel. Like if you're a
Yeah.
DP or a director, or an actor trying to get your stuff, like just trying to cut a reel. Ask anybody who's been in the business more than 10 years, actor, camera, director. Yeah, what was it like when you used to go to cut your reel? And they'll just, they'll take a deep breath and a sigh.
So much footage you lose, you don't get,
Yeah.
you just don't get it.
Yeah.
You never get it. And I think about all these beautiful shots. I remember in particular, I shot this thing in Miami. It was an independent little crappy film, but whatever. It was a beautiful shot of this guy riding down this palm tree, beautiful road. And I'm like in the back of a convertible with the SR3 on a hi-hat,
Yeah.
sandbag, and I'm shooting him driving as we go through this whole
Mm-hmm.
beautiful neighborhood with the trees and the palm trees. He's on a purple Harley. It was a great shot. Would have been great on my reel. Could not get it from the director.
Really?
To save my life. Couldn't get it.
You just didn't want to hand it over? Or?
Hey, it's on this negative and I can't get it off. And I'm like, oh my God, please,
Yeah.
So after a while, you shoot all this beautiful stuff that disappears somewhere and you're just like,
Yeah. The ones
I was in a car shooting too for the same film, shooting in a convertible of the kids driving to South Beach.
Okay.
It was a fun shot. I don't know.
No.
Track shot, beautiful stuff, gone.
Gone with
I
the
was
wind.
a big handheld because being a still photographer,
Right.
I was like, it wasn't even about one image for me. I was doing series photography. And then, once you gave me a camera that I could shoot motion pictures, I was in the car. It was moving all the time, almost too much at first. Like, hey, let's put it on a dolly. Hey, let's go handheld. Oh, let's do a tracking shot.
Nice.
Throw it in the back of a van. I'm good to go, So I was always moving the camera.
What are some of your favorite types of films to work on? Like what types of environments and challenges do you seek out or really enjoy when it comes your way?
Well, now it's mostly documentary, honestly, but what I would shoot pretty much any indie film, but I like some of the fun things where there was that driving shot through the streets of San Francisco and I'm in the back of the car and shooting it through, from that perspective. So I kind of had that guerrilla style of filmmaker mentality. And I like the idea of operating myself. I like the idea of not having a big crew. So I think I had a very European style of working that, for me, I didn't really always want to be I didn't want to be on a huge set and just be some, second loader over there. I didn't ever see myself climbing that ladder. And I do respect people who did it. I really do. That definitely wasn't going to be my thing. I wanted to shoot right out of the gate.
I definitely can relate to this. I wasn't a shooter, but I definitely relate to this aesthetic. I just wanted to make stuff, and everything else be damned. I'd get my hands on a thing and shoot it and do the best I could. And if it wasn't great, okay, live and learn, move on. And hopefully the next thing is better. Don't do that again. Okay,
exactly. You grow from everything you complete.
Yes.
An
Yes.
unfinished film kind of is hanging there over your shoulder for the rest of your life. If you complete it,
Oh,
it's done. All right,
yep.
it kind of sucks, whatever, but I learned something from it.
Absolutely. And I won't get into my story, but I can relate to that more than I would like to admit. But I definitely have come to the wisdom you just shared and my dotage as I move toward the sunset in hopefully 30 years. I'm being dramatic. What are some of your, this is such a Barbara Walters question, so no disrespect to her and pardon me for asking, but what are some of your favorite films and why?
Well, I would probably have to go to the fact that since I am teaching film,
Yeah,
I noticed that I keep showing a lot of the same films
sure.
because I love them.
Well, that's
You
why I
know,
want to ask you. I mean, you're deep in this, and you're looking for the best of the best for various reasons. What are some of those things to you?
okay, so we may as well start at the beginning. I always teach Citizen Kane
Yep.
because it just has everything in it.
Yeah.
And so for people who say, "Oh, it's boring" or whatever, then I start telling them all
You're
the
not
reasons why
watching
it's
it.
not.
Yeah.
Then they go, "Oh, okay, okay." So I like turning on younger students to things they would never think of before. So films that I like are probably going to predate the 90s. They're from the
Mm-hmm.
20th century.
Okay.
Not to say that I don't like films now, but some of them are just not sticking with me.
Okay.
You know, um, and it's because of the ones I keep teaching. So I was first impressed by Rebel Without a Cause too,
Mm-hmm.
by the directing of Nicholas Ray, who's amazing, and also the performance of James Dean, but the color and the saturation
Mm-hmm.
and the way it looked and felt and how it's like what I love about film is that it's the only way we can time travel and the way it creates a sense of that time period. And you
Mm-hmm.
can feel what it would have been like in that time period.
Yeah.
The Graduate does the same thing for me, but that has even more in it. So I like a film that lets me time travel, that lets me go into that world.
Did you like, appreciate, enjoy Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Speaking of time traveling.
I like the nostalgia part of it. And of course, you can't not like Bob Richardson's cinematography, but I like the period piece aspect of it, and not always the stuff that DiCaprio was doing in the Western film,
Mm. Mm.
And okay, so there's a little bit of that, but I enjoyed the film
Yeah.
overall because I did like the nostalgia aspect of it. I'm not a huge Tarantino fan because I'm not big on violence, but
Yeah.
I did enjoy that film because it brought me back to that time and place.
That was what I was thinking, was the time travel aspect. I
Yes,
would
which
assume
I
that.
love. The
Yeah.
Doors, Oliver Stone. I mean, he was great at it.
I love that film. I think that's, for some reason, that film has become very popular to hate on in recent
Yeah.
years. And it's like, have you watched it? Like, really, have you actually watched it? It's pretty, it kind of stands up for what
Yeah.
it is, and then some. I mean, it's really, if you embrace it, if you go with it, it's very immersive. I mean, Apocalypse Now was something like
Oh my
that for
God.
me,
Yes.
where it's just, I mean,
Mhm.
it's still in me. I mean,
Yes.
all these
Well,
years later, all these times seeing it, teaching it,
me
dissecting it,
too. I
watching
just
it,
read the
different
grad student.
cuts, you know, his wife's documentary, of course, shed all so much more light on it. Um,
Well, Apocalypse Now is one of my. It's not the easiest one to watch all the
The
time, but the
Hearts of Darkness.
cinematography and I love it. I love Apocalypse Now, um, and I just made my grad students watch that the other day
Oh yeah.
because of the cinematography, because of the tone, visual tone of it, the
Hmm.
whole thing. I mean, it's a great example of that too. And so, I mean, I could go on my whole thing. I love
Sure.
Billy Wilder's films. I could go on and on. I love Sunset Boulevard. I love The Graduate. And people say, well, I saw it. I said, well, watch it again because it's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're never going to watch it with the same perspective that you're watching now. Look for the symbolism, watch the transitions, watch more of what's going on in that than just, oh, I saw that before,
Yeah. I took it in while I was, eating popcorn or something.
Mhm.
Well, I'm also, let me ask you this. I mean, you respect so many people, and
Yeah.
who are, if I could ask you to single out a handful of your favorite cinematographers, both past and then, present, like, who do you think, I'm curious, who do you think are, just for you, just the all-time, the Mount Rushmore list, and who are you looking at today? Who's either, maybe they've been killing it for 20 years, but they still have a bright future. Yeah. So that's kind of a
Oh
two-parter.
yeah.
But who's your Mount Rushmore list?
Well, let me go
And
into the past first.
whatever works
So,
for you. Whatever works for you.
so in terms of the past, you've got Greg Toland, hands down. Then you got let's think. Let me think. Where was I going to go for a minute there? I just lost my train of
So
thought. Russell
I
Meddy. Russell Meddy.
okay, and I know that
Russell.
name. What did he shoot?
He shot. Okay, so this is a guy who shot films for Douglas Sirk, all those
Oh,
beautiful.
right. Okay.
But then he goes and shoots Touch of Evil for Orson Welles.
Okay.
So he's pretty amazing. Robert Burke's stuff in The Graduate is beautiful. But present day, I mean, the cinematographers that I had the opportunity to speak with are actually cinematographers whose work I admired. So
Right.
as we were mentioning Apocalypse Now, when I was a little 23-year-old seeing that film, I was blown away by the cinematography and I looked at the credit. I remember Vittorio Storaro.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that film made an impression on me, and then um, and of course, him working with Coppola on that, and then Michael Chapman's work with Martin Scorsese
Mm-hmm.
on,
Mm-hmm.
what he did with Taxi Driver and Raging Bull is a beautifully shot film. I had the opportunity to meet Michael Chapman when we were at Camera Maj in Poland in 2016, and I was like a fangirl chasing him down, asking him to sign his. Um, so I had a nice chat with him, but today, going a little bit more into the present, I am very impressed by the work of Rachel Morrison.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Sure.
I hope to become a fan of hers. I think she's got a beautiful style. She picks projects that have a theme that resonates with me. So I'm a fan of her work. I'm a fan of Rodrigo Prieto, very much so. I think he's an artist and a genius and a sweet, sweet man. And his work with Scorsese shows that. But I love what he did with Brokeback Mountain too, because it was so subtle and so beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I like Matty Lebatique's work because he's edgy, he's cool, but he's brilliant with what he's doing.
I noticed
The
you quote him quite a lot in the book. Actually, I would
I had a
say.
great
Yeah.
interview with him, and he said so much good stuff. I couldn't stop using it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Emmanuel Lubezki with his work that he does. Tree of Life, the director whose name just flew out of
Which
my head,
was that Malik?
Terrence Malick.
Yeah.
Their collaboration is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
very, very beautiful work they do together. So, I could go on and on. Of
Sure.
course, I have to mention John Seale just because I was really impressed by the work he did in like the 80s and stuff. And he's just, just like, that's pretty. Who shot that? Oh, John Seale. Oh, that's pretty. Who shot John Seale? Rain Man, stuff like that. So I never thought I would get to interview him because
Mm-hmm.
he lives in Australia. So I sent a letter to the ASC and I thought, well, I'll never hear from him, whatever. And I get this phone call, random, out of the blue, and it's John Seale. I'm
Huh.
driving down Los Cienega, got some time if you want to chat. And I'm like, holy shit, man, where are you?
That's hilarious.
So
Did he catch you in the middle of dinner or something, and you had to scramble to
I
like
was
grab a pen and notebook?
talk, and I was like, I'm going, whatever.
Yeah, that's cool.
So, I mean, there's many, but most of the people that Seamus McGarvey, I love what he does on with the hours was impressed me first of all, but then on Atonement, everything else he shoots,
Mm-hmm.
sweet man too, a lot of fun to chat with.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that I've been focusing on I'm fortunate that they're a lot of my favorites, and they're actually talking to me.
As we sort of begin to land the plane here a little bit, it's funny whenever you get two film nerds talking, it's like, oh, that was an hour, and it just disappears
Yeah.
instantly, which is one of my favorite types of conversations to have, of course. In terms of this interview book that you're working on, can you tease a little bit more of that? I mean, is it scope and intended?
Yes.
What makes it, a lot would distinguish it from this other book, but what's your goal with that book?
Well, that book is one that I had full interviews. I mean, an hour and a half. They were so interesting and compelling that I felt that they should be shared with similar film geeks as us, that people would enjoy and find snippets and highlight things as I did in Masters of Light that came out in 1984.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do with this one is even up the balance between men and women more. Older, established with more contemporary, and talking about not only what it's, they're working with cinematographers and how they like to work and how they prep and films they've worked on, but also the lifestyle that I think
Okay.
cinematographers need to be aware of, that it's not the easiest lifestyle.
No, it's
Um,
not.
and and so I'm trying to cover all of that in the interview book. So that one I'm putting together. It's a lot of fun to be editing it, and the hard part is chasing them down again for a permission. But yeah,
Sure.
actually, but I get to revisit them.
So,
You know,
so revisiting some of the previous interviews, are you also doing? I imagine you're probably doing some new interviews, or have done some newer interviews
yes,
specifically for that. Did you get Rachel Morrison in there?
yes, I did.
Nice, very nice,
I've
very
had a great
nice.
time. I was very happy with that, and so that is going to be finished probably sometime this year,
Okay,
and that's going to be with Rutledge. And then
okay,
I just pitched to Michael Weezy and Ken yesterday
okay. Something
because
new.
I was thinking about, I got something new, and it's going to be a lot more about aesthetics.
Oh, okay.
So a little less technical than cinematography for directors,
Mm-hmm.
a little bit more aesthetic, but with a lot of similar things,
Hmm.
themes that I'm going to explore deeper with aesthetics and visuals and examples that way. So that's something else I'm thinking about.
That sounds great. I'll get a copy. I'll buy a copy if Ken doesn't send me one first.
He'll send you one.
You have to write it though. So, well, listen, I
Yeah.
better let you get back to it, and I really appreciate your time. Is where could people learn a little more about you online? Do you have a website that you like to use, or I can also put links in the show notes if you want to dig anything up, or are you just a woman of mystery? Just enjoy your
I like
work,
to
and
remain somewhat of an enigma, but
that's fine.
mostly because I'm not good at putting my website together. So I need help in that sort of thing. I
Yeah.
need to update my.
A lot of authors. That's, by the way, a lot of authors. That's kind of been their thing. It's like, I've got a website, but don't list it because okay,
Yeah.
okay. I haven't
So I
updated it
mean,
since
my
1993.
son is good with media. I need him to help me to
Got it.
just up things like and create a more present. I need to create a better author's website. Yes.
Well, I have a link to the cinematography for directors book for Michael Weesey, so we'll put that in the show notes. And Jackie, it's really been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to chit chat with me today.
Thank you. It's been fun.